Almost in the heart of ancient Europe lies a colorful little country where about 4 million inhabitants of French, German, and Italian origin have defied traditional prejudices and founded a friendly nation known to the world as Switzerland. Switzerland the Beautiful, a land of snow-capped mountains, fragrant pine woods, crystal blue lakes, babbling brooks, and flower-laden meadows, where something of spring, summer, autumn, and winter may be seen during any season of the year. Aside from this scenic beauty, the Swiss Alps have played a most important part in the history of Switzerland, for the invading armies of the old Roman Empire were stopped at the foothills of the Alps, never realizing that beyond the formidable alpine peaks were fertile plateaus and flower-strewn meadows, where man and nature could live in perfect harmony. And thus it was that the Swiss Alps protected the native people of Switzerland until they established a republic, which remains today as the oldest existing republic in the world. In May and June, the flowery pageant is at its best, for every hill and valley is covered with an assortment of vividly colored wildflowers, a rustic symphony of fertility and freshness. An interesting feature of alpine plant life is the tremendous size of the flower in proportion to the plant itself. The energy in the roots is devoted first to the flower, which is in full bloom long before the leaves of the plant are developed, and this accounts for the vivid colors so characteristic of alpine wildflowers. In contrast to the modest little wildflowers are the rushing mountain streams, which originate in the regions of snow and swiftly flow down the mountainsides and through the valleys, beautifying the landscape and bringing superabundant water power and constant sustenance to the fertile soil of the country. Nestling amidst the flowery meadows, we find a typical dwelling, which illustrates the inherent love of color, which is so characteristic of the Swiss people. Elaborating the windows with painted designs is one of the oldest and most unique practices in the decorative art of Switzerland. The picturesque old city of Lucerne is a favorite spot for travelers, who regard it as a delightful center in which to spend a holiday. Aside from the fact that it has some of the finest hotels in the world, its unique situation at the point where the Lake of Lucerne touches the northern edge of the Central Alps makes it a natural focus for Switzerland's great tourist traffic. There is a beautiful old world atmosphere about Lucerne, and quaint old wooden bridges of historic renown bring joy to the hearts of the lovers of medieval architecture. The decorative watches and clocks that are constantly on display remind us that Switzerland leads the world in their manufacture and that a large percentage of her population is engaged in their production. Perhaps the most famous of the many interesting sights in Lucerne is the Lion Monument, which perpetuates the memory of the brave Swiss guards who were killed in the defense of Louis XVI during the French Revolution. In the smaller towns of Switzerland, on special occasions, native costumes are worn. The people of Switzerland are of German, French, and Italian lineage, about 70% of them speaking German and the remainder speaking French and Italian. But in spite of their ancestry and the political strife that often surrounds their little country, they have developed no national prejudices outside of Switzerland itself, which is a perfect model of peace and neutrality. Wood carving is an old craft that is still practiced in some of the smaller villages, and it is not an uncommon thing to find some very fine specimens of the art, fascinating in their vigor and simplicity and expressive of local tradition. Upon arriving at the famous resort of Interlaken, we behold the glorious summit of the Jungfrau, which is approached by a railway whose terminus lies in the very midst of the most magnificent of alpine scenery. Great peaks soar sublimely over all, timeless as eternity itself. From the Jungfrau Joch are to be obtained the wonderful views of the surrounding country, which before the advent of the railway was the jealously guarded preserve of the alpine climber. The fact that it is on the border of one of the most important snow and glacier regions in the Alps has caused Interlaken to become one of the most popular resorts in Switzerland. The grazing land on the Swiss mountainsides is the property of the community, and every villager has the right of pasturage. Down in the valley during the great grazing season, the herds are assembled early in the morning and driven to the communal pastures. After sunset, they are returned and claimed by their respective owners. Switzerland contains a relatively high proportion of happy and prosperous citizens. Freedom and equality are widespread, and about 9 out of every 10 families own the soil they cultivate. Consequently, there are no great extremes of poverty or wealth in this independent little republic. The largest and most cosmopolitan city in Switzerland is Geneva, headquarters of the League of Nations and a recognized center for international conferences. Situated on the banks of the River Rhone at the western extremity of the beautiful Lake of Geneva, it has been highly praised by poets and will remain in the memory of every visitor as a city of great charm and unique position. Geneva is a city where the best that is in man harmonizes with the best that is in nature. It has long carried on a crusade against all that is old within its boundaries. But for the past 100 years or more, its history has been international rather than local. Perhaps humanity's greatest debt to Geneva lies in the fact that it was in this fair city that the world-famous Red Cross Society was founded, and its first international meeting was held in this building over 70 years ago. In deference to Switzerland, the colors of the Swiss flag, showing a white cross on a red field, were reversed to form the flag of the Red Cross Society, a society that now has over 20 million members throughout the world, devoted to unprejudiced acts of mercy in behalf of humanity. It is fitting that the city which houses the parent society of the Red Cross should also be the one to open its gates and welcome to the League of Nations, thereby establishing headquarters in Geneva for 2 of the most uplifting forces ever inaugurated in the cause of civilization. And it is with this thought that we say, farewell to Switzerland, the beautiful. Ireland's contribution to civilization ranks high, but the love of the Irish people for the Emerald Isle is not so much in its history as it is in a passionate devotion to the land itself, which is noted for its natural beauty. The ancient round towers, adding mystery to the landscape, have baffled antiquarians for centuries, but it is generally believed that they were built over 1,000 years ago as places of refuge during a stormy period in Ireland's history. The real charm of the Emerald Isle is in its countryside, which, thanks to continuous rains, is perpetually clothed in a blanket of green. Little farms and snug cottages have an appeal that is rooted deep in Irish hearts, and when the natural beauties of the country are emphasized, one can readily understand the intensity of the love which the native of Ireland has for his Emerald Isle. Such scenes as this must bring fond memories to many an Irish exile in other lands. The cow, the pig, and the donkey are the props of the Irish countryside. In some sections of Ireland, sweet-scented gorse is utilized for fences. Notwithstanding its formidable spines, this gorse yields a palatable and nutritious winter forage for the animals. To fit it for this purpose, it must be chopped and bruised to destroy the spines and mixed with hay or straw. The genuine spell of Ireland is likelier to be found in the simpler scenes that still remain unsung. Often the Irish farmers scratch the barest living from the land, and their wealth is counted in pennies. The desires of the people are small desires, and these little animals become a very necessary and important part of their existence. Rocks and boulders are abundant in many parts of Ireland, and by infinite toil throughout the centuries, they have been piled into walls or fences dividing the fields and pastures. The burro or donkey is so indispensable to rural life that few farms in Ireland could be conveniently managed without him. He has a reputation for dullness and obstinacy, but somehow when he is at work, patiently lugging his heavy burdens, one does not feel that he deserves his reputation. The picturesque little villages that are so characteristic of old Erin form a colorful background for a country folk who live in modest circumstances. They find in their humble thatch-roofed cottages pleasures that are unknown in the palaces of kings. Ireland has always been a land of dreams, where the leprechaun and the banshee are ever present, and whatever may be lacking in the material evidences of wealth is more than compensated for in the imaginative minds of the people, who from the cradle to the grave walk hand in hand with angels and inherently look heavenward for all the joys which life on earth may withhold from them. The traveler who approaches the Emerald Isle in what may be termed an appreciative or receptive mood will not only derive the most pleasure from his sojourn, but will also arrive at a better understanding of the people, who are characteristically hospitable and emotional. Beautiful children are the rule in Ireland, and no matter how many brothers and sisters follow close upon the heels of each little collie, beauty still reigns supreme, and it has been the inspiration for many an Irish song.
Irish eyes are smiling, sure it's like a morning spring. In the lilt of Irish laughter, you can hear the angels sing. When Irish hearts are happy, all the world seems bright and gay. And when Irish eyes are smiling, sure they steal your heart away.
Sentiment and imagination have always been proverbial in the hearts of the Irish people, and it is significant that her poets have never been wanting in glorifying the Emerald Isle with poetry and song. Ireland is a country of definite personalities, for she is in many sections still untouched by modern influences. Among the many ancient landmarks of Old Erin is Howth Castle, a splendid baronial mansion built by one of the Earls of Howth in the 15th century. The famous gardens adjoining the castle will delight the visitor, especially in the rhododendron season, when myriads of brilliant-colored blossoms are in full bloom. For many centuries, it was the strange custom for Howth Castle doors to be opened during meal times to all strangers, a custom which dates back to the days of Queen Elizabeth, when Ireland produced a strange character, half woman and half pirate, by the name of Grace O'Malley. Grace called at Howth Castle one day and was denied admittance and informed that the family were at dinner and could not see her. But Earl of Howth was soon to repent his inhospitality, for Grace kidnapped his heir, and his ransom was only achieved by his father's promise to keep open door to every visitor who might wish to enter Howth Castle and its gardens. And so, for many centuries, it has been the privilege of the stranger in Ireland to visit this beautiful garden at Howth Castle and to enjoy to the full the beauty of the rhododendron in its most effulgent perfection. From an artist's point of view, the Claddagh village at Galway is one of the most interesting sights in the British Isles. Nothing is more astonishing than this little village of neat, whitewashed, thatch-roofed cottages, planted at haphazard angles, with the front door of one opening into the back door of another. Here the paths of earth have been beaten hard by the feet of innumerable generations, going back to the Norman conquest. Old customs have been perpetuated within this village for centuries, and although they have long been forgotten by the rest of Ireland, they are still the priceless heritage of Claddagh. The language they speak is Gaelic, and they pride themselves in the fact that they have kept their family strains pure. To the Claddagh people, you can only talk about the Claddagh. The remainder of the world has no appeal to them. Even today, they stand together, apart from their neighbors. The Claddagh is the last living vestige of ancient Ireland. But regardless of the changes wrought by time, we will always think of Ireland as a country of smiles and tears, of pathos and tragedy, of legend and song. May her priceless music go down through the centuries and her smiles overbalance her tears. And it is with this thought that we say, farewell to Ireland, the Emerald Isle.
Shall ring with our mind.
The most romantic section of the Netherlands is that tiny province known as Zeeland, where time seems to have stood still and the costumes and customs of the people remain unchanged. Today, Vera, one of the quaintest and most serene of Zeeland's towns, seems to be sleeping, with happy dreams of a glorious and distant past, when her navies traded with the remote places of the world, and her sons went out to the four corners of the earth to establish colonies. Vera's charm has always endeared it to artists, who find in its quaint streets and costume peasantry pictures rich in color and romance. But one looks to the people for the individuality that makes Zeeland different from all other places in the world. In most of the villages, the Protestants and the Catholics have their distinctive costumes. This hat is the Protestant headpiece. The hats both of the male and female population are also a mark to distinguish the peoples of the different provinces. Even different pursuits or occupations are known in this way. Cleanliness seems to be the ruling passion of the Dutch housevrouw, and polishing and scrubbing are unceasingly carried on with a continuity and thoroughness unknown outside of the Netherlands. The people must of necessity paint their houses every year, for the paint is being constantly washed away. The pavements, as a rule, consist of very rough cobblestones. The industrious housevrouw may be seen at a regular hour every morning, scrubbing the pavements until the cobblestones shine as if polished by hand. It has been said that Saturday is always a great cleaning day all over the Netherlands, because it will not be possible to clean things again until Monday. And Monday is also a great cleaning day, because, of course, nothing has been cleaned since Saturday. Be that as it may, there is an old Dutch proverb which says, when everyone sweeps before his own house, then are the streets clean. The children play mostly in the streets, and indoor games are almost unknown. Dutch children are among the prettiest and best cared for in the world. One peculiarity about their costumes is that no distinction is made in the style as regards the age of the wearer, for children and parents are dressed exactly alike, the only difference being in the gold or silver ornaments for which children are disqualified. The streets are filled with these young people, but one sees few babies. In fact, the very young and the very old are seldom seen in public. Dogs are generally used in Zeeland to pull the little carts in which most of the land commerce is carried on. They are usually well cared for and appear to enjoy the unique service which they render their masters. Wooden shoes are never worn in the house, and our habit of wearing our shoes inside the home never ceases to send a thrill of horror and dismay into the heart of the Dutch housevrouw. The wooden shoes are slipped off just outside the door, and the family goes about indoors in its stocking feet. So one can always tell how many people are inside the house by the number of shoes before the door. Zeeland is one of the richest agricultural provinces in the Netherlands, and it is noted for its picturesque and productive farms. A spirit of indescribable restfulness greets one everywhere, but underneath it there is a note of stolid determination, of thoroughness, of a desire to achieve prosperity, and through it contentment. The pastures are dotted with black and white cows, for the Dutchman will have no other. These great creatures appear to be more contented than the cows of other lands. They produce millions of gallons of milk, from which are made millions of pounds of cheese and butter, important commodities of the Netherlands, by which the Dutch farmer often becomes wealthy. Even the sheep contribute their share. Incidentally, weather-burned arms are considered a mark of beauty by the Dutch dairymaid. The redder her arms, the flatter her chest, and the broader her hips, the sooner will she be led by some happy young Dutchman to the village kirk. It is in Zeeland that one sees the hooded farmer's wagon, so reminiscent of the old American prairie schooners. But the Zeelander, with his love of color, lavishes brilliant reds and blues and greens upon his wagons. Even his horse is a colorful horse, for the breed distinctive of this section of the Netherlands is a light taffy color. Zeeland is a conquest made by man over the sea. It exists because the Zeelanders preserve it, and it will vanish whenever the Zeelanders shall abandon it. They now grow fruit and flowers and vegetables, where seaweed and marine life once thrived. Their object has been to claim it from the sea, to keep it, and to make it worth the keeping. The Zeeland farmer is a prosperous and peace-loving type. Great wealth he may have, but he is never ostentatious. The typical Zeeland girl is noted for her domestic achievements. Her life is generally restricted, monotonous, and laborious, yet sheltered, secure, and eminently comfortable. The most picturesque day in Zeeland is Sunday, for it is then that the country folk may be seen in their most colorful costumes. It is not unusual for a well-dressed lady of Zeeland to wear as many as 16 petticoats at a time. It is considered good style to have much plumpness below the waist, and when it is the work of nature, the lady is considered fortunate indeed. The peasant dress is rich and becoming, but there is one part of the costume never seen before in any other part of the world, and that is the bangles before the eyes, looking like horses' blinkers. These ornaments are made of gold and represent a small fortune in themselves. They are handed down from mother to daughter, even unto the third and fourth generation. And so life goes on among the modest and contented country folk of Zeeland, who live in a land of peace and prosperity, and find among themselves the simple elements of happiness, which render to their little kingdom a semblance of paradise on earth. And it is with this thought that we say, farewell to Zeeland, the hidden paradise. From the north rim of Grand Canyon in the state of Arizona, we behold in the purple glow of a setting sun what is generally regarded as the world's grandest and most colorful spectacle. In the morning light, the canyon takes on a different hue, and it is this constant changing of color with each new hour of sunlight that baffles the artist who would paint the fleeting moods of this divine abyss. The north rim is unquestionably the most advantageous point from which to view Grand Canyon at its best. It is here that Mother Nature paints her most magnificent pictures with a profusion of color and splendor that silences our feeble attempts at description and inspires us with a hymn of praise for the almighty powers of creation.
Oh, give thanks to the Lord, God of all. Sing His name, He whose blessings fall.
In carving this colossal gorge, more than a mile deep, the eternally busy Colorado River, which may be seen in the distance, has laid bare millions of years of the Earth's history, and its fascinating chronicle of antiquity can easily be read on the walls of the canyon, which consist of successive rock layers, like beds of masonry. The Grand Canyon was discovered by a Spanish explorer in 1540, and for more than 2 centuries thereafter, it remained practically unknown. From hour to hour during the day, the scene changes, and new shadows bring forth new colors, until just before sunset, we behold that ethereal mantle of purple, which no artist has been able to faithfully reproduce. And now we continue our journey to Bryce Canyon in the state of Utah. About 60 years ago, a Mormon pioneer named Ebenezer Bryce settled near the entrance to this canyon and succeeded in making a precarious living by raising livestock. He was a typical pioneer, and the scenic grandeur which surrounded him did not seem to interest him. The only comment on record which he made regarding this canyon was, "It's an awful place in which to lose a cow." Nevertheless, when the United States government made it a national park in 1928, it christened the canyon with the name of Bryce in memory of old Ebenezer. Perhaps there is no place on the earth that better illustrates the story of geological evolution than the remarkable natural formations of Bryce Canyon. Bridges, spires, minarets, arches, gables, all the achievements of architecture were formed here long before the coming of mankind. And the one grand thought behind it all is the unceasing patience of nature, building and destroying, with no thought for time or space or man.
The cowboy roams beneath the sky, through canyons deep or mountains high, where life is sweet and the soul is free. Oh, the canyon land is the land for me.
Drip of raindrops, aided by ice and wind, carrying away a grain of sand at a time, carve these fantastic monuments. As we gaze upon this celestial city, which has been reflecting the flush of morning and the glow of evening since time began, we lift our voices again in praise of Mother Nature, the greatest of destroyers and the greatest of builders. Within a short distance of the canyon, beautifully situated in the forest primeval, we find at Bryce Lodge and its adjoining cabins all the comforts of modern living, which add greatly to the convenience of a visit to the canyon.
Oh, buffalo gals, ain't you coming out tonight, coming out tonight, coming out tonight. Oh, buffalo gals, ain't you coming out tonight, dance by the light of the moon. Ain't you coming out tonight, coming out tonight, coming out tonight. Ain't you coming out tonight, dance by the light of the moon.
Until comparatively recent times, the canyon country was most inaccessible. But today, the building of good roads by the United States government has made it possible for all people to see what was once the exclusive privilege of the native Indians and a few pioneer white men. The Indians always regarded this strange land with a certain awe and fear. They made it a point never to be caught in the canyons after dark, for they believed them to be haunted by the demons of the night. Such awe-inspiring scenes have always struck fear into the hearts of primitive men. But to modern man, liberated from the shackles of superstition and fear, this divine spectacle is a revelation of the colossal forces of Mother Nature, who, for her own purpose, broods and rears and elevates, and also for her own purpose, levels, sweeps away, and destroys.
Oh oyo en mi alma una canción que nació al recuerdo de tu magia, una tarde plena de nostalgia en el fondo de mi corazón.
Under the beautiful cloud-laden skies of Central America lies Guatemala City, home of over 100,000 inhabitants and center of the wealth, culture, and political administration of the Republic of Guatemala. Until comparatively recent times, this picturesque and interesting little metropolis, situated upon a gigantic plateau almost a mile above the level of the sea, was practically inaccessible to travelers. But today, thanks to modern steamship service and the advent of railroads, Guatemala City is conveniently approached, and as a result, it is rapidly creating a conspicuous place for itself among the capital cities of the Western Hemisphere. In the days when the church and the clergy dominated Guatemala, many magnificent religious buildings were built. But since the church has been separated from the state, much of its property has been confiscated, and what remains is more or less subservient to a non-sectarian government, which has utilized many of the former church buildings for municipal purposes. The history of Guatemala takes us back to the days of the old Spanish explorers, when all of the present-day Central American republics were merely provinces of Mexico under the dominion of Spain. One Alvarado, a henchman of Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico, headed a military expedition into Guatemala. Like most of his kind, Alvarado carried a sword in one hand and a cross in the other, and the native Indians who dared to resist him had their choice of either living by the cross or dying by the sword. But when we look upon scenes like this, where once nothing but jungle thrived, it somewhat condones the faults of the old Spanish conquerors, who with all their alleged cruelty and bloodshed, brought to the lands that they conquered a sense of artistry and beauty that is certainly a praiseworthy tribute to their memory. Guatemala City boasts of having one of the finest and most modern hotels in Central America. Patios like this play a most important part in the construction of the better class residences, for they provide a haven of rest from the noise and the dust of the streets. El Patio typifies the tastes of old Spain, but just beyond its flower-strewn walls, the primitive traffic of old Guatemala goes on, just as it did for centuries before the coming of the white man. The Indian still prefers his own legs as the safest and surest means of travel, and the weight of his burden seldom varies, for he believes that any depreciation in the maximum load is a sign of weakness. Consequently, on his homeward journey, he often carries stones to make up for whatever he unloads in the marketplace. Due to the presence of active volcanoes, innumerable hot springs are found in various parts of the country, and the native Indian women still take a practical advantage of this natural phenomenon. Unlike the Indians of North America, relegated to reservations and stymied by the encroachments of the white man, these Indians are independent and free to pursue their lives in comparative peace. They may share in the benefits of white civilization if they choose, and not a few of them have shared their blood with the white man, so that today a large number of the inhabitants of Guatemala are called Ladinos, which is the name for those of mixed blood. There are over 1 million pure-blooded Indians living in the Republic of Guatemala today, and their mode of life has been changed but little by the influences of civilization. Antigua, the ancient capital of Guatemala, was formerly one of the most imposing cities of the New World, with splendid palaces and more than 60 impressive church buildings. It was destroyed twice by earthquakes, but this church resisted the catastrophe on both occasions. Designed by architects imported from Spain almost 2 centuries ago, it remains to this day as one of the finest examples of ecclesiastical architecture in the New World. And now we come to the living and more vital story of Guatemala, A story that begins and ends with the cultivation of coffee, the most important commodity of the country. The valley of Antigua is particularly well suited for the cultivation of this valuable plant, which is usually planted under shade trees to protect it from the heat of the sun, as well as the intensity of the wind and the rain. The forest-like plantations that are devoted to the growing of coffee are called fincas. Coffee flourishes best in latitudes up to about 5,000 feet, and this fact, added to a suitable climate, accounts largely for Guatemala's success in growing coffee that ranks with the finest in the world. The plant was first brought to Guatemala by a Spanish priest who obtained the seed from Arabia. When the coffee berries are ready for picking, the whole countryside is enlivened with activity. Most of the coffee pickers are Indians, who are as much a part of the coffee finca as the trees from which they pluck the precious red berries. The owner of a finca practically owns the Indians who work for him, for he is responsible for their medical care and their living throughout the entire year. After the berries are picked, their red skin is washed off by a depulping process, and the coffee, a greenish-gray in color, is thrown upon the cement-covered yards to dry in the sun. The brown color by which coffee is generally known comes after it is roasted. The whole financial status of Guatemala is more or less determined by the success or failure of its coffee crop, for about 4/5 of its revenue comes from the coffee industry. Nothing in Guatemala is more entertaining than the dancing of the native Indians, who have adopted the marimba as their most popular musical instrument. Goes on indefinitely without changing its movement, symbolizing, as it were, the life of the Indians of Guatemala, who for centuries have kept to the even tenor of their ways, as indifferent to the changes of civilization as the beautiful natural environment in which they prefer to live. Colorful Guatemala, land of natural beauty, tradition, and romance, here on the shores of one of its picturesque lakes, within the shadow of one of its most alluring volcanoes, we reluctantly say farewell.
Ya te llevo muy dentro de mí, siempre lo mejor fuiste para mí, eres la ilusión de vivir.
Plaza Church in the Mexican quarter of the city of Los Angeles is a quaint reminder of the days when California was under the flag of Spain, and this historic plaza was alive with the color and romance of Aragon and Castile. For it was here, upon this hallowed ground, that the governor of Spanish California unsheathed his sword and stuck its point into the earth and said, "Here, in the name of God and our sovereign king, we will found the Pueblo of Our Lady, Queen of the Angels." That was over a century and a half ago, but even today, there is restored within the confines of this old plaza a tiny thoroughfare known as Alvaro Street, where one may witness something of the color and romance of Los Angeles, as it was in the heyday of its career, under the flags of Spain and Mexico. Street was formerly one of the two main thoroughfares of Los Angeles, over which passed the sandaled feet of brown-robed padres, and from the balconies of which dark-eyed senoritas cast their spell of romance upon the young courtiers below, as they strummed their guitars and sang their songs of love in the musical language of old Spain. In interesting contrast to this romantic little lane of colorful yesterdays, we behold the great modern city of Los Angeles, one of the fastest-growing cities in the world. In less than half a century, the population of this young metropolis and its associated communities comprising Los Angeles County has increased from 50,000 to about 2.25 million of inhabitants. So that today, the formerly obscure little Mexican pueblo has become the 5th largest city in the United States. Wilshire Boulevard is a fine example of the many grand boulevards that reach out from the heart of Los Angeles, like the arms of a gigantic octopus, embracing numerous suburbs such as Pasadena and Hollywood, which have grown so rapidly that they too have become cities by their own right within the tremendous county of Los Angeles. Hollywood Boulevard is the main street of that illustrious community which has contributed so much to the international prominence of Los Angeles. Hollywood itself is a quiet, well-behaved little town with a greatly exaggerated reputation for notoriety. Among the many outstanding theaters of Hollywood is Grauman's Chinese, which is noted for its elaborate prologues and the dazzling previews that are usually attended by the motion picture stars in all the glamour and glory of a first-night performance in Hollywood. Perhaps there is no place in America that can compete with Los Angeles County in the construction of architectural oddities, for here one may find anything from a brown derby to a shoe, transformed into practical use with little or no concern for the consistencies of orthodox architecture. As a matter of fact, the inspiration or source of design for all this odd construction could have been taken from an illustrated book of nursery rhymes. The brown derby, the old woman in the shoe, the blue mill, and the doll village are just a few of the many colorful oddities that help to make Los Angeles one of the most unique places in the world. On the green lawns of the Hollywood potteries, we are fascinated by a colorful array of pottery, fine examples of an art that seems to add another chapter to the nursery of fanciful things that one is apt to see in this fanciful realm. And this is only natural, for there is no place in the world that dwells in a realm of fancy comparable to that of Hollywood, the land of make-believe. Here in the mighty mansions of Cinemaland, under such familiar trade names as Paramount, RKO, Fox, Universal, Warner Brothers, Columbia, United Artists, and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a vast majority of the world's motion pictures are produced. Beyond this imposing entrance to the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studios, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, we are afforded the opportunity of seeing something of the tremendous architectural range that is covered by the production of motion pictures. For here, within a comparatively small area, one may find a replica of practically every style of architecture known to man. A tour of movie land is virtually a tour of the world. And while we're on the subject of motion pictures, it is fitting that high tribute should be paid to an industry that dedicates itself to the entertainment and enlightenment of mankind. For through its international medium, the motion picture screen, history is reborn. The immortal classics of literature are reenacted, and life itself is brought to the peoples of the world in a language that all can appreciate and understand. The home of Mickey Mouse is one of the most interesting studios in Los Angeles. Here we find a small army of workers devoting themselves to the task of compiling cartoons that have become world famous. And behind all this is the genius of the master who created Mickey Mouse, the Three Little Pigs, the Big Bad Wolf, and a host of other cartoon characters. The incomparable Walt Disney himself. No one in the history of organized entertainment has given more joy to the world than Walt Disney, the brain and the voice of Mickey Mouse, and the patron saint of children the world over. The Hollywood Bowl, nestling in the hills of Los Angeles County, is a more recent milestone in the long road that Los Angeles has traveled since it was founded in the old plaza near Alvaro Street. For nothing determines the progress of a community so much as the development of its cultural arts, and it has been the good fortune of Los Angeles County to have concentrated within its boundaries a large proportion of the best that America has to offer in this respect. This dress rehearsal of the Francesca Bragiotti dancers, preparatory to a grand community performance, is our final impression of Los Angeles, Wonder City of the West. Nestling peacefully in one of the most picturesque settings of the Canadian Rockies is the little town of Banff, a town that is lavishly endowed by nature with some of the most awe-inspiring scenery to be found upon the earth. In fact, the scenic environment of Banff is so colossal that it literally reduces the town itself to a mere speck, a tiny dot of civilization proudly courting Mother Nature in her grandest moods. The broad main street of Banff unrolls like a carpet to the base of Cascade Mountain, and there stops abruptly as if powerless to penetrate the imposing barrier that blocks its way. The Canadian Rockies are composed of a group of ranges with over 600 peaks, one of the most picturesque of which is Mount Rundle, rising to a crest like a gigantic frozen wave from some vast ocean of stone. Perhaps the most romantic and colorful guardian of the law in the countries of the white race is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, every member of whom has the proverbial reputation of always getting his man. His scarlet coat was originally chosen to convey the strongest impression upon the Indians over whom he had jurisdiction. It was in such beautiful settings as this that Wilfred Campbell, the Canadian poet, wrote many of his most inspiring verses, and it is fitting that we should quote him here. Domed with the azure of heaven, floored with a pavement of pearl, clothed all about with a brightness soft as the eyes of a girl, girt with a magical girdle, rimmed with a vapor of rest. These are the inland waters, these are the lakes of the West. Here where the jewels of nature are set in the light of God's smile, far from the world's wild throbbing, I will stay me and rest a while, and store in my heart old music, melodies gathered and sung by the genies of love and of beauty, when the heart of the world was young.
Moon, dear, how near your soul divine, sun,
Motoring along the famous highway from Banff to Lake Louise, we behold a continuous panorama of variegated scenery, views that were withheld from the penetrating eyes of the white man until half a century ago. In a comparatively brief period of time, the Indian trails of yesterday have been transformed into some of the finest highways in the world, and formerly obscure areas of the Canadian Rockies have become vast playgrounds for the recreation and enjoyment of all people. Mountain climbing in this region, which is under the supervision of Swiss alpine guides, has become as popular a sport as it is in Switzerland itself. Incidentally, a well-known Swiss mountain climber, in giving his impression of the majesty of that vast sea of mountains which comprise the Canadian Rockies, is quoted as having said, "It is 50 Switzerlands in one." Among the many interesting mountain ranges in this region is that of the 10 Peaks, every one of which is over 10,000 feet in height, forming a picturesque background for colorful Lake Moraine, the pearl of the Rockies. And now we come to what is generally regarded as the most beautiful setting of its kind in the world, lovely Lake Louise. A broad sheen of beautiful blue-green water, calm, serene, and unruffled, as is all perfection, surrounded with mountains that rise from the lake like the encircling walls of Eden itself. The first view of Lake Louise is as unforgettable as are only a few of our human memories, and this one scene fills the eye completely and perfectly. At the far end, the massive reaches of Victoria Glacier, with its huge canyons of snow, afford a glistening white background to the rich colorings of the lake and the attending mountain walls. Chateau Lake Louise, gracefully harmonizing with its glorious setting, is an ideal rendezvous for the thousands of visitors who come here annually from all parts of the world, and it is certainly a great tribute to the genius and forethought of its builders. In the early dawn, Lake Louise is a true, self-effacing mirror, reflecting the vast pyramid of snow and glacier at its farther end with such faithfulness that it reveals two perfect images, with bases meeting at the shoreline.
Reflections in the water, just you and I, sweetheart. Each kiss becomes a ripple that circles round my heart. Be caught in the crush of rocks in the rush of streams in the hush of a dawn. Will our reflections in the water be gone?
The famous outdoor swimming pool, which is adjacent to Chateau Lake Louise, is built of gleaming stone and is surrounded with great glass walls about 15 feet in height for protection from prevailing winds. The water, fresh as the morning, is piped from a mountain stream and heated to normal temperature before it reaches the pool. And it is here, in this paradise of the Canadian Rockies, that we reluctantly say farewell to beautiful Banff and Lake Louise. Tokyo, capital of the Japanese Empire and one of the 3 largest cities in the world, is also the surprise city of the Orient, for it has the unique distinction of having assimilated the exterior forms of a Western metropolis without having sacrificed its Oriental modes of thought and feeling. As we gaze upon this American-like metropolis, we recall the story of Perry, the American Commodore, who graciously knocked upon the gates of Tokyo and aroused Japan from its Oriental slumber. That was only a few generations ago when Tokyo was a modest little Japanese town with no apparent aspirations to compete with the great commercial marts of the world. But behold what a little time has done, and consider what a little more time may do for Tokyo, as it is now one of the fastest growing cities in the world, with a population of about 6 million inhabitants. To those of us who may have visualized Tokyo as it has often been visualized in Western operettas and plays, this is perhaps a disillusioning revelation, for we know sections of cities in our own country that are as Oriental in outward appearance, at least, as Tokyo. Nevertheless, in spite of what we see here, Tokyo is inwardly Oriental. Her people may have surrounded themselves with Western architecture, Western machinery, and all the other foreign trappings, but fundamentally, they are still loyal to the ancient traditions of old Nippon, and the undying philosophy of the East is still the chief inspiration for their thoughts and deeds. On September 1st, 1923, occurred the worst disaster in the history of Japan, the earthquake and fire which caused so much destruction in Tokyo that a great number of its buildings had to be rebuilt, and this may account somewhat for the many new and imposing edifices that may be seen all over Tokyo today. Behind all this great modern show, however, there is still to be seen, in the heart of Tokyo, a picturesque little replica of old Nippon, the ancient moat which surrounds the imperial palace and Tokyo residence of His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Japan, who is said to be a direct descendant of the Sun Goddess and the 124th Emperor in deity by order of birth and succession, thereby making him the oldest living member of a ruling dynasty in the history of mankind. The palace itself is approached by a double bridge over which none but members of the royal family and the most elite may cross. Among the important buildings that escaped the horrible catastrophe of 1923 is the Imperial Hotel, designed by an American architect and subsidized by the imperial family, one of the most celebrated hostelries in the Orient. It was completed during the tragic year of the earthquake in time to provide shelter for many of the victims, as well as temporary headquarters for the foreign legations that had been destroyed. The fundamental purpose of this world-famous hotel is to provide a social center for Tokyo and a general meeting place for the long lanes of travel that converge here from all parts of the world. Theater Street is a colorful illustration of Japan's great love for theatrical entertainment. There are almost 2,000 motion picture theaters in the country, and Tokyo boasts of having a vast majority of the best. Japanese signs are interesting even to eyes that cannot decipher them, and they certainly provide a colorful medium for theatrical advertising. The Japanese have become motion picture enthusiasts, and in addition to importing a great number of foreign films, they produce many of their own. It is said that the influence of Hollywood's films is keenly felt by the rising generation, and not a few of their radical Western ideas owe their origin to foreign motion pictures. One of the most popular of the ancient sports of Japan is jiu-jitsu, or judo, the manly art of self-defense, which is characteristically Japanese. The purpose of this scientific sport is to make your opponent use his own strength to defeat himself. In other words, the force with which he thrusts himself upon you is used to turn the tables against him. Excessive weight and strength, therefore, may be more of a handicap than a help as compared to speed and dexterity. At present, jiu-jitsu is taught in most of the schools of Japan for its value in mental and physical culture, and many of the schools have teams which have seasonal clashes of national importance. Incidentally, the red and white color combination is consistently used as a background for sporting events all over Japan. Every year on March 3rd, the day is set aside for the little girls of Japan to observe as Dolls' Festival Day. And on this occasion, dolls that have been in the family for generations are brought out to be honored and caressed with childlike affection. The Japanese doll is not simply a plaything, but a means of teaching a girl to be a good wife and mother. A doll which is preserved for a great many years in one family and is loved and played with by generations of children seems to acquire a soul. In fact, one little girl said of her doll, "If you love it enough, it will live." In addition to the dolls, miniature household effects are placed on display before elaborately costumed effigies of the Emperor and the Empress of Japan. And at the end of this perfect day, all of the ancestral dolls are carefully put away again for another year, and the little doll-like daughters of Nippon must console themselves with their ordinary everyday dolls until the next great doll festival day. The boys, too, have a day of their own, May 5th, and it is heralded by the flying of carp kites, colorful symbols of courage, over the homes in which the boys assemble to honor the deeds of their ancestors, as well as the national heroes of their country. Unlike the girls, the sons of Nippon have unanimously adopted Western dress, and this fact illustrates again the characteristic tendency of the Japanese to mingle modernity with antiquity, as on this occasion when they honor their ancient heroes, chief of whom is Jimmu Tenno, the first emperor of their country. And here is Torimasa, the famous warrior knight and the greatest archer of his time. The powerful knight of virtue overcoming vice symbolizes one of the first principles in the education of every Japanese schoolboy. And so it is that hero and ancestor worship is ingrained in the minds of Japanese boys, and not the least of those in their list of heroes are the ancient mariners of Nippon, who went down to the sea in ships, not unlike those that still ply their trade in the harbors of Tokyo and Yokohama. And even here, that strange and characteristic clinging to the old, yet ever absorbing the new, is apparent when we compare the old Japanese junk with the latest Japanese liner, gracefully heading out to sea, carrying great cargoes and messages of goodwill from the east to the west. Messenger of modern times, bridging the Orient and the Occident, and emphatically defying the idea that east is east and west is west and never the twain shall meet. Commercially, at least, the twain have met as far as Japan is concerned. And that is the thought that we take with us as we sail away from modern Tokyo, the surprise city of the Orient. Remotely situated in the hinterland of Guatemala, far from the madding crowds of civilization, lies the quaint and quiet little town of Chichicastenango, the sacred city, sacred to over 30,000 direct descendants of an ancient copper-colored people, the Mayan Indians, who are credited with having kept the lights of learning aglow in Central America long before the coming of the white man. The colorful and imposing archway which forms the main entrance to Chichicastenango, however, owes its construction to the genius of the white man, for the Mayan Indians, with all their proverbial architectural skill, never discovered the principle of the arch, and as a result, many of their ancient temples, built with false arches, have suffered premature decay. The Mayan Inn is also the handiwork of white men, built to accommodate the straying travelers of modern times who have only recently discovered Chichicastenango, which, by the way, is one of the few places left upon the earth where native people neither dress nor act to please tourists. Music and dancing represent the chief source of their amusement, and the marimba is about the only musical instrument in native use. Although the early Spaniards introduced the marimba, the Indians have adopted it as their own, and the unique gourds, which are hollowed out and used for sound boxes, are believed to have been invented by the Indians themselves. From the day that they are born, the Mayan children are taught to control their emotions. And possibly that is why there is such quietness in their faces and such repose in their movements and their postures. The clothes which are worn by the native Indians are woven by themselves in a manner that has changed but little in the past several centuries. Before the cheaper chemical dyes destroyed the market, over 1 million tons of cochineal dye were exported from Guatemala. But at the present time, the cochineal is cultivated only for local use, as the natives prefer it to color their cotton and woolen fabrics. The principal foodstuff of Aboriginal America was corn or maize, and it continues to be the staple food of the Mayan Indians, who grind it out on stone today, as their ancestors did generations before them. When the Spanish explorers first came to Central America, they wore a costume not unlike that which is worn by the Indians of Chichicastenango today. As a matter of fact, the style of the costume was copied from the Spanish buccaneers, and insofar as styles in Chichicastenango do not change, it is an interesting illustration of how a primitive people can preserve and utilize a style of dress for centuries. Market Day in Chichicastenango is one of the most interesting sights in Central America, for here are assembled hundreds of Indians who have come in from the outlying districts with their homegrown and homemade products, which are placed on sale in primitive and colorful array. Here, too, the characteristic lack of demonstrativeness is apparent, for there seems to be no desire on the part of the Indian merchants to sell their goods, and they appear to be quite indifferent to any of the prospective customers. The Indians of Chichicastenango completely disdain the idea of using horses or wheels by way of assisting them in transporting their burdens. As a matter of fact, it would be safe to assume there are many Indians in the outlying districts today who have never seen a horse and do not yet know the principle of the wheel and the great service which man has derived from its variegated uses. The gentlemen with the black hats are ambassadors of religion, and it is their duty on market day to walk among their fellow Indians, presenting a religious emblem to be kissed, and collecting whatever donations the faithful may wish to contribute for the benefit of the church. And now we come to one of the strangest demonstrations of religious fervor to be found in the world today. For at Chichicastenango, the sacred city of the Mayan Indians, Christianity and paganism seem to go hand in hand with each other, and the result is extremely colorful and interesting. When the Spanish conquerors first came to Chichicastenango, they ruthlessly destroyed the pagan temples of the Mayan Indians and built Christian churches upon the debris. But it appears that it was hardly more than an architectural transition, for upon the steps of this Christian church, pagan fires still blaze forth and pagan hearts still beat with all the fervor of ancient Maya. The swinging of the smoking censer pots seems to have the significance of driving away evil spirits, while the worshipers inside the church pray before the statues of their favorite saints for the blessings of life and the forgiveness of their sins. And the remarkable fact about this whole demonstration is that after the Mayans complete their worship at the Christian shrines, many of them retire to the hills and uncover the hidden images of their ancient Mayan gods and pray to them in sincerest reverence, even as their ancestors did long before the coming of the white man. The moral of it all seeming to be that they are willing to accept the Christian religion, provided it does not prevent them from worshiping the pagan gods of their forefathers. And it is here that we conclude our visit to Chichicastenango, the sacred city of the Mayan Indians.
Beloved bird, my fellow pilgrim ringing, I hear thee singing as I sang above.
Over 400 years ago, the adventurous Portuguese explorers who discovered and claimed Brazil for the crown of Portugal sailed into this picturesque harbor and called it Rio de Janeiro, or River of January, because they discovered it in the month of January, and they believed the beautiful inlet into which we now sail was the mouth of a river. As we pass within the shadow of this gigantic promontory, known as Sugarloaf, we wonder if the white men who first saw it could have dreamed that it was destined to become the mighty sentinel of an enchanted metropolis with a population of over 1 million inhabitants and a reputation of being the most magnificent city in the world. Passenger ships arriving at Rio today literally tie up at the foot of Main Street and immediately become a picturesque part of the skyline, as well as a convenient point of egress to the city itself. Rio de Janeiro is not a manufacturing city. Therefore, there is a preponderance of foreign goods on sale in all the smart shops. Nevertheless, foreign influence has not changed the strong allegiance which the Brazilians have for their native continent. They proudly proclaim themselves South Americans, and they very much resent the North Americans' alleged monopoly of the word American. The period from 1902 to 1906 witnessed the wonderful transformation from the old to the new Rio, a comprehensive project so boldly conceived and brilliantly executed that there is hardly a landmark of the old city to be seen in the metropolis today. The most unique feature of the clean and spacious streets is the decorative mosaic work that adorns the sidewalks. Almost every block has a pavement with patterns so individual in design that one could find his way about the city by becoming familiar with them. Rio is particularly noted for its numerous and colorful parks, which are scattered in picturesque profusion throughout the city. In 1808, the King of Portugal was forced by Napoleon to abandon his country and reestablish his throne in Brazil. When he arrived in Rio, he brought with him, among other things, the first tiny sprouts of the famous royal palms, which he planted here. It was decreed that only members of the royal family might have the privilege of cultivating this particular species of tree. But time and nature have overruled the regal command, and the royal palms that were meant to be the exclusive property of Portuguese royalty are now the common heritage of all Brazil. The outstanding landmark of Rio is Sugarloaf Mountain, and from whatever angle one may view it, it forms a most impressive picture. swimming is one of the most popular sports in this pleasure-loving city. Consequently, many attractive swimming clubs have been erected along the picturesque shoreline. The architectural designs of these clubs are unusually distinctive, and many of them are actual reproductions of famous institutions in Spain and Portugal. Among the many fine boulevards in this city of splendor, the most beautiful is the Avenida Beira Mar, with its marble promenade encircling the waterfront for a distance of 5 miles. As in most countries of South America, the color of one's skin does not always determine one's social standing. As a matter of fact, the racial color line seems to be so thinly drawn that it has become a haven of toleration for all races. Nevertheless, the Portuguese language still prevails. In the business districts of the city, there are a number of tiny shops where the more industrious young ladies of Rio earn their livelihood. This is called the butterfly industry, in which the colorful wings of butterflies are immortalized by an art that was inaugurated here many years ago. A design is first painted on glass, and the delicate butterfly wings, which have been carefully assorted for their best colors, are cleverly worked into the design and held in place by adhesive tape. Another layer of glass is finally placed over the tape, and the wings, thus preserved, will hold their lifelike colors indefinitely. There are over 700 different species of butterflies in Brazil, and they are much larger and more colorful than those of North America and Europe. The completed articles consist of tea trays, vanity and jewel cases, bonbon dishes, and decorative pictures designed to glorify the city's landmarks. And needless to say, the predominating design is Sugarloaf, the center of attraction for all eyes that glory in the magnificence of Rio de Janeiro, the city of splendor. In Yellowstone Park, one of the world's largest and grandest of playgrounds, where the wonders of nature inspire us with a sense of peace and strength, unknown to those who dwell too constantly in the crowded cities of strife and confusion. Less than a century and a half ago, this magnificent waterfall in the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone River greeted the eyes of John Colder, the first white man to explore this colorful region and bring back to civilization the story of its wonders. A story so startling that the United States government sent out expeditions to confirm it. And as a result, in 1872, Yellowstone became a national park for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. Yellowstone Park is also a sanctuary for the protection and preservation of wild animals, foremost among which are the grizzly bears, who usually emerge from their native haunts at twilight for an evening meal prepared for them by the park attendants. The seagulls are said to migrate each year from the Pacific coast to Yellowstone Lake, where they are also protected by the game laws of the park. Grizzly bears are exceedingly nervous, and regardless of constant proximity with man, they never seem to completely relax in his presence. Their great strength and cunning make them dangerous beasts when aroused, but they seldom attack human beings unless provoked into doing so. Feeding a grizzly bear by hand is a very dangerous diversion, for as soon as he devours all that you may have to offer him, he will beg for more, and if he does not get it, he may try to eat the hand that feeds him. And if he happens to be unusually hungry, he may not be satisfied with a mere hand. Hence the park warning, don't feed the bears. Perhaps the most astounding feature of Yellowstone Park is the geyser region, wherein Mother Nature has devised a series of phenomenal safety valves for the escape of the Earth's internal heat. This is called the fountain paint pot, and it is composed of colored clay. Ages ago, a young geyser may have played here, but the erosion of time and the constant pressure of steam may have broken down its walls and crumbled it into the pool of bubbling mud, which we now behold. The variegated materials of which the Earth's surface is composed are largely responsible for the shape, color, and action of the fantastic formations so typical of this region. And the source of it all is heat, internal and unceasing heat. Many of the vivid colors which we see here are said to be the colors of tiny plants, a sort of fungus growth which clings to the rocks and is nourished by the flowing hot water. Other colors come from various chemicals tossed up from the depths of the earth by gas and steam. This white grotto is the ghost of a dead geyser, but a short distance away may be seen a sapphire pool in which a new geyser is being formed. 40 feet or more below the transparent depths of this colorful spring, a cone has opened, and at definite intervals, the first spouts of a young geyser come to the surface. Ultimately, the sediment that returns to the pool after each eruption will build a cone upon the surface, and the geyser may look and perform like the older geysers that we see here. Now we come to the star attraction of Yellowstone Park. Old Faithful, the geyser that has erupted at average intervals of precisely 65 minutes as long as it has been known to man. It precedes its perpetual performances with a rumbling prologue like the roll of bass drums. Then an immense column of steam and hot water soars gracefully skyward, gaining velocity until it reaches a height of 120 feet or more. And for about 4 minutes it continues this dazzling display, which makes it the most phenomenal natural fountain in the world. When one first visits this wondrous region, he is apt to seek understanding through questions and answers. But ultimately, his babbling words give way to a profound silence. For this is a land of mystery that still baffles the wisdom of science and the understanding of mortals. But we cannot say farewell to this world of natural phenomena without feeling the sentiment so fittingly expressed in the song that is familiar to all who have visited Yellowstone Park. From early spring to late autumn, the floral pageant of Japan continues. And after the cherry blossoms come the azalea, covering the countryside with effulgent blooms of crimson and pink. With the azalea comes the wisteria with its graceful sprays of soft purple in various shades. As we gaze upon scene after scene of colorful flowers and trees, we marvel all the more at the aesthetic sense of the Japanese, who devote so many of their precious acres to the cultivation of plants and trees for no other reason than to gratify their adoration for all that is beautiful in nature. Inside their homes, this characteristic trait is also apparent in the arrangement of flowers for decorative purposes. In Japan, flower arrangement is an art in itself, and it is included in the curricula of all the better class schools for girls. While there are different methods of arranging flowers according to various schools, the fundamental principles are the same, in that every arrangement is made to symbolize heaven, man, and earth. In this instance, for example, the highest branch signifies heaven. A branch on the right, bent sideways, denotes man, and a branch on the left, which is always the lowest twig, represents earth. Each flower which is added to this arrangement has further significance, which would be difficult for Western minds to appreciate and to understand. Suffice it to say that as far as the Japanese are concerned, the art of flower arrangement is certainly an exalted expression of the national love of flowers. The great Buddha preached his first sermon in a deer park near Benares, India, over 2,500 years ago. And in commemoration of this memorable event, the Buddhists of Nippon have founded a deer park at Nara. One of the profoundest teachings of Buddha was to show kindness to all dumb creatures, and the sacred deer at Nara have been so overindulged with this kindness that they have become the constant companions of all who will take the trouble to feed them. The most magnificent sight in all Japan is Fujiyama, the sacred mountain that has inspired volumes of legend and song.
Oriental paradise, I hear you calling, and although you're far away, I'm in your spell. I see cherry trees in bloom, perfume scented, the temple bells are ringing, a theme I know so well. I can close my eyes and see lakes blue as sapphires, and a sunset with a blend of gold and blue. Neath the magic of this spell, I keep building an oriental paradise for two.
About 100 miles south of the equator, there is a tropical paradise known as Java, the largest and most populous island in the Dutch East Indies. Its colorful waterways, reminiscent of Holland, date back to the Dutch explorers who came here 3.5 centuries ago and planned the first canal for a territory that has grown to be over 50 times the size of Holland and the most important colonial development under the flag of the Netherlands. Batavia, the capital and chief seaport of Java, as well as the hub of Asiatic Holland, presents a panorama of life that is typical of the Dutch East Indies. Javanese by nature are a quiet and peaceful people, more or less subdued by the vertical rays of an equatorial sun, as well as the benevolence of Mother Nature, who has favored them with a constant bounty of tropical fruit, some of which could never grace the tables of the Western Hemisphere because of its tendency to perish a few hours after it is picked. And speaking of food, there is a meal especially served in Java that is known as rice tafel, and it consists of the strangest combination of food ever prepared for human appetites. Fried eggs, roasted peanuts, rice, fried corn, bananas, shredded coconuts, fried chicken, pork, and so on, up to 20 or more different ingredients. If you should desire a second helping of some choice morsel, the entire retinue of waiters will return, and it's a matter of eliminating one by one until you find the man with the particular food you desire. After such a meal, it is only natural that one should witness a dance like this, which is about the next best thing to a nightmare. As a matter of fact, it is often referred to as the nightmare dance. Typical Javanese music, if we may call it such, is more or less rhythmic noise. And like the Javanese dancing, it goes on and on, as long as there is a spectator left with patience to endure it. But now we must say farewell to this dancing nightmare and journey northwestward in the track of the sun over a tropical sea to the island of Ceylon. We arrive in the harbor of Colombo, capital and chief seaport of Great Britain's crown colony, Ceylon, where at the crossroads of two hemispheres, the East meets the West, and trade is carried on in the traditional manner of Old England. Colombo's chief landmark is a lighthouse on Main Street, which throws its nocturnal beams over the city to ships at sea, and bears the unique distinction of having a lighthouse keeper who walks to and from his lighthouse, ducking and dodging bicycles, rickshaws, automobiles, carts, and pedestrians. And while he is on duty, the whirl of traffic continues just beneath his tower. The island of Ceylon is only a few miles off the coast of southern India, and at one time it may have been part of the mainland, thus accounting for the prevalence of East Indian types. The men are inclined to be feminine in manner as well as dress, most of them wearing their hair as long as the women. They prefer to do their own sewing and mending, and not a few of them cook the family meals. Generally speaking, the women of Ceylon, from childhood to old age, have a much easier time than most native women in the Eastern Hemisphere. Buddhism is the pervading religion of Ceylon, and picturesque Buddhist temples are very much in evidence all over the island. Buddhist priests in their colorful robes lend interesting atmosphere to the temples. They receive no definite income for their services, but they have the prerogative of knocking on the door of any Buddhist house for food and drink and an occasional piece of cloth to supplant a worn-out robe. Generally speaking, the Buddhist priests are wholesome and good-natured men, serving what appears to be a constructive cause with an admirable degree of simplicity and unselfishness. Perhaps the most famous Buddhist temple in Ceylon is the so-called Temple of the Tooth at Kandy. According to tradition, one of the great Buddhist teeth is preserved within this temple, and it is exhibited once a year with an elaborate ceremony that is attended by Buddhists from all parts of Ceylon. Among the animals of Ceylon, the water buffalo is perhaps the most indispensable, and he is the inseparable companion of the Singhalese farmer, who probably gives more time and attention to his buffalo than he does to his children. The water buffalo's skin is of such fine texture that it is practically devoid of pores. Consequently, during the heat of the day, he must be bathed several times in cool water. Vying with the water buffalo from a point of usefulness is the elephant, who must also be bathed at least twice a day because of his thick skin. It is said that the elephants of Ceylon are such accurate judges of time that every day at precisely the same hour, they will quit work in the fields and go down to the water to drink and bathe. Consequently, the time of day may be determined by the natives through the habits of the elephants. Ceylon's most popular seaside resort is called Mount Lavinia, and it is here that the wealthier residents find relief from the intense heat of Colombo, the picturesque boats of the native fishermen providing no small amount of pleasure to those who are fond of sailing. Amongst the fishermen, we find the feminine types who are as proud of their raven locks as was the proverbial Samson of biblical fame. But now the time for our departure is drawing near. Off the golden coast of Mount Lavinia, the great orb of day, resplendent in an aura of tropical colors, is descending into a tropical sea, forming a glorious setting in which to conclude our glimpses of Java and Ceylon. Hong Kong, the hub of the Orient, is strategically situated at the junction of international trade routes, where the itinerant peoples of two hemispheres vie with each other commercially and socially, in settings that are Chinese by tradition and British by possession. Less than 100 years ago, a few British ships dropped anchor in this harbor and endeavored to negotiate trade with China, the so-called Celestial Kingdom, which had persistently refused to open its gates to the outside world. Peaceful negotiations proving in vain, a war followed, and as a result, Great Britain received an indemnity of $6 million on the island of Hong Kong, which is now a most important link in the world's greatest chain of empire. Before the arrival of the British, Hong Kong was a desolate island infested with pirates and smugglers and overrun with pestilence. Under Great Britain's rule, it has been miraculously transformed into one of the greatest seaports in the world, through which passes about $1 billion worth of shipping every year. Ships from all parts of the world sail in and out of this harbor at regular intervals, but in spite of the modern craft, the poor Chinese families cling to their junks and sampans, as they have been doing for centuries, completely indifferent to the innovations of time and progress. The story is told that in former days, little boys were carefully tied to the sampans, while little girls were allowed to run free, the conclusion being that if a girl baby fell overboard and was drowned, it wouldn't make much difference. Thanks to British influence, however, this cruel custom is no longer practiced. The whole gamut of human life is often passed upon these sampans: birth, marriage, and death, within sight of land, but seldom on land. A bowl of rice and a fish constituting a diet that varies but little all through life. But with it all, there seems to be a general atmosphere of domestic peace and contentment. We are told that in the harbor of Hong Kong alone, over 30,000 Chinese families live on these boats, a floating city inhabited by the descendants of the original settlers, as if they were literally pushed off the island, but lingered about to witness the transformation of Hong Kong from a barren rock into one of the most modern and up-to-date colonies in the world. Fish is one of the chief foods among the natives, and consequently it forms an important local industry. A species similar to white bait being in conspicuous evidence along the waterfront. This fish is used as an ingredient in a special dish composed of rice, duck, chestnuts, noodles, and bamboo sprouts, usually served at important social functions. Sampan life is not a lazy one, for everybody seems to be occupied. The men do a reasonable amount of work, but the women appear to be the most industrious. They clean the boats, mend clothes, care for the children, cook meals, and lug loads from morning until night. Although the outside world thinks of Hong Kong as an entity which comprises harbors, cities, and all that goes with the Crown Colony, there is really no such thing as the city of Hong Kong. The city and port is Victoria, so called in honor of Queen Victoria, who made the island a Crown Colony. Along the Bund or waterfront, the international pageant of Victoria is at its best, for here passes in the course of an hour representatives of practically every race, creed, and color in the world. The tall men with the white turbans are Sikhs from India, originally imported by the British to guide the destinies of the local police force. The island of Hong Kong has been westernized considerably by British influence, particularly in the capital city of Victoria, where modern architecture and modern business are in vogue. But beyond the western front is the typical and proverbial life of Hong Kong, still clinging tenaciously to the unchanging manners and customs of ancient China. In the Chinese section of Hong Kong, it is estimated that there are 150,000 people living and doing business on an area smaller than 160 acres of farmland, thereby making it the most densely populated section in the world. Not far from the busy marts of trade and traffic is the picturesque and restful pleasure resort of Hong Kong, known as Repulse Bay. Years ago, Chinese pirates were repulsed in this bay, hence the strange name that it bears today. This colorful resort is a rendezvous for the social elite of Hong Kong, as well as for visitors from all parts of the world. It is particularly noted for the beautiful Chinese girls who are in conspicuous evidence during the social season. In addition to its colorful and ultra-modern bathing pavilion, Hong Kong proudly calls attention to its Repulse Bay Hotel. one of the world's famous hostelries where the East meets the West in a convivial spirit of pleasure and good fellowship. Although many of these beautiful Chinese girls have been educated in Occidental institutions and speak other languages besides their own, they seem to prefer the ancient dress of China to the innovations of Western styles. And after looking at a few of them, we are inclined to feel that they are right in their preference. Nevertheless, their schooling abroad has contributed largely to the liberation of Chinese women, which is now in gradual progress throughout all of China. And it is here that we have the pleasure of meeting Miss Hong Kong, who is regarded as the island's most beautiful Chinese girl. And now, with the exotic smile of Miss Hong Kong and the picturesque impressions of the island she symbolizes, indelibly fixed in our memories, it is time for us to conclude our visit and reluctantly say, farewell to Hong Kong, the hub of the Orient. Japan, the proverbial land of cherry blossoms, has also devoted many of its precious acres to the cultivation of tulips. And were it not for the daughters of Nippon, who lend native atmosphere to this setting, one might think it was in Holland. So cleverly have the Japanese emulated the Dutch in the art of growing tulips. One of the favorite outdoor recreations of the Japanese people is known as flower viewing, and it provides an incentive for long walks through the parks and the country, where nature and all the ramifications of her floral beauty is silently worshipped. The whole of Japan may be described as one great natural garden in which are found smaller gardens, public and private, designed to produce exquisite effects. In order to comprehend and appreciate the beauty of a Japanese garden from a native point of view, it is necessary to understand the meaning of stones. Unless we can feel that stones have character, much of the artistic meaning of a Japanese garden is lost to us. The Buddhist monks who first brought the art of landscape gardening to Japan believed it was possible to express moral lessons in the design of a garden. Consequently, gardens are often contrived according to the character of the owner, so that the typical Japanese garden expresses both the mood of nature and the mood of man. Love of beauty and love of nature are undoubtedly the heritage of the humblest Japanese, and every detail in their woods and gardens is an illustration of art concealing art. Although the Japanese hold all the seasonal wonders of nature's floral pageant in high esteem, It is the cherry blossom season that captivates their hearts and inspires them with a fervor that has become their natural heritage. No finer tribute has been given to women than that which was written by the Japanese author, who said, "Woman is our immediate inspiration in our love of all beauty. For us, her image blends with all the loveliness of nature. She is an inseparable part of the bloom of earth and the sweet vocal sister of its loveliest of blossoms. The response of our poets to her beauty is also akin to their joy in the mute but vivid appeal of the flowers and in the changing harmonies of the year." In the private life of a Japanese lady, nothing is of greater importance than the dressing of her hair, and it is a rare privilege to see how it is done. The professional hairdresser who usually calls at the homes of the wealthier class ladies first sends her apprentice to wash the hair and perfume it, immediately after which she herself arrives and the more intricate procedure begins. From the time she is a child, the dressing of a Japanese lady's hair passes through a series of styles, each of which reveals the proximity of her age, her social status, and whether she is married or single or a widow. It requires from 1 to 2 hours to complete this hairdressing in all its ramifications, and this very formal procedure takes place every 3rd or 4th day, so that no small amount of the wealthier Japanese lady's time is spent with her hairdresser. It is practically impossible for the Japanese lady to dress her own hair in the traditional manner of her country, and the same is true of her kimono dressing, which also necessitates professional assistance, as each color, fold, and cord of this garment signifies something of importance. The obi, or sash, which is used to hold the kimono together, is the pride of the well-dressed lady of Japan, and invariably it is an indication of her wealth. The designs on the obi are often brocaded with gold thread, and in rare instances, obis have been sprinkled with jewels. Consequently, they range in values from a few yen to several thousand yen. Each Japanese lady accumulates a great number of obis, as they represent the proudest possession of her wardrobe. And now that her hair has been dressed and her kimono donned, she may go forth with her friends, adding a natural loveliness to the colorful scenes in which she moves. For nowhere in this world do we find human beings more closely allied with the beauty of nature than the ladies of Japan. And it is here, in this Oriental Garden of Eden, that we say farewell to floral Japan. This is Stockholm, the queen city of the Baltic and the capital of Sweden, where over 500,000 inhabitants participate in the diurnal round of life and trade. Stockholm enjoys the unique distinction of being a city without slums or beggars. It is built partly upon an archipelago of 13 islands and partly upon the mainland, with a navigable outlet to the Baltic Sea. Because of the innumerable skerries or waterways which separate the islands, much of the traffic is by boats, and consequently the city has also been called the Venice of the North. The charm of Stockholm's skyline is chiefly in the fact that the 16th and 20th centuries have been blended in it so harmoniously that it is difficult to determine where one ends and the other begins. Although an occasional squad of soldiers on parade may be seen mixed up with the traffic in the streets of the capital city, it is difficult for us to associate this peace-loving country with militarism, for there has not been a war here in over a century, and it is not likely that there ever will be, for neutrality and peace are fundamental principles in Swedish government. Most of the tram cars carry mailboxes, and insofar as the central post office is near the terminus of the tram cars, this has proven to be an efficient as well as a novel idea. Cooperative houses have become the vogue in Sweden, and Stockholm naturally leads in the construction of these huge dwellings, wherein hundreds of families are living upon a cooperative basis. That is to say, among other things, they are members of clubs or cooperative stores, where as a result of their combined purchasing power, the prices on household necessities have been greatly reduced. Then, too, the profits of the cooperative stores are shared by the members. Needless to say, these houses are all equipped with modern improvements, and electricity is the dominant factor throughout. As a matter of fact, Sweden is probably the most electrified country in the world, for there is hardly a residence, even in the most remote parts of the realm, that is not equipped with electric lights and telephone. In addition to the modern cooperative idea, there is in Sweden a very strong family individuality, which asserts itself in the private homes and serves to maintain a sane balance between the socialists and the capitalists. Incidentally, all of the girls in Sweden are not blondes, and here we purposely introduce two attractive brunettes just to prove our point. Among Stockholm's modern architectural achievements are the Engelbrekt Church, named after a Swedish patriot who was assassinated several centuries ago, and the world-famous Town Hall, completed in 1922 at a cost of over $10 million. This monumental edifice, with its magnificently furnished interiors and its numerous architectural innovations, is considered to be the most artistic modern building in Europe. When a city is built upon a group of islands, it is only natural that boats should play an important part in its existence. And consequently, this Venice of the North is noted for the colorful variety of boats which may be seen along its numerous waterways. One of the ideal things to do when visiting Stockholm is to take a boat ride around the islands and then stop off for a meal at one of the many fine restaurants along the way. At Bellman's Row, the musicians are dressed in the costumes that were worn in the time of Bellman, the immortal Swedish poet, whose songs and music are one of the many features of this famous restaurant. Here we find a typical example of the world-famous Swedish smorgasbord, where one may help himself to the greatest variety of hors d'oeuvre ever concocted in the annals of good food. And this is only supposed to be an appetizer, after which, to the strains of Bellman's music, we may settle down to some serious eating, which often consists of from 8 to 10 courses, balanced with a variety of choice beverages, including the famous Swedish punch. Incidentally, the Swedish people are noted for their innate love of flowers, and no matter where one goes in Sweden, he will find a flower girl with a basket of colorful varieties, which no visitor can resist, especially when he falls under the spell of the typical blonde salesmanship, which usually associates itself with the flowers. Not far from Bellman's Row is the Skansen Bear Pit, where one may see fine specimens of bears, which are indigenous of Scandinavia. One of the most popular sports in Sweden is sailboat racing, and there is hardly a week in the season that one may not have the pleasure of seeing sights like this. Now the time of our visit is drawing to a close, and as the midnight sun lingers on the skyline of the city, marking the end of a long and joyous day, we most reluctantly say farewell to Stockholm, Venice of the North, Queen of the Baltic, and the pride of Sweden. In modern times, steamship travel has become a most popular source of pleasure, and of all the thrilling experiences of world cruising, none can excel the trip from New York to Chile on the luxurious American liners which carry the stars and stripes to all the interesting ports of call along the way, and in addition to providing accommodations and diversified entertainment for their passengers, act as ambassadors of trade and goodwill between the continents of North and South America. The passengers we meet on board represent so many walks of life and hail from so many different countries that they bring to this great pleasure craft an international atmosphere, for here we find doctors, lawyers, diplomats, authors, engineers, actresses, and numerous others from every field of human endeavor, all gathered together as one great family, sharing alike the conveniences and the pleasures of one home, representing, as it were, the nearest approach to a practical utopia ever inaugurated in the annals of human experience. In all our world travels, nothing has brought us greater pleasure or more friends than life on board these luxury liners, and we feel highly indebted to the great steamship companies who have contributed so much to the comfort and pleasure of modern travel and the consequent enlightenment of mankind. And now our great ship is sailing into the harbor of Valparaiso, chief seaport and gateway to Chile, that enterprising republic which has enthusiastically joined with Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru in attracting the stream of trade and travel to the west coast of South America. The customary thing to do after arriving at Valparaiso is to drive out to Viña del Mar, a picturesque suburb with a colorful array of hotels and private residences, a golf course, a racetrack, bridle paths, and bathing beaches, all combining to make Viña del Mar one of South America's most popular pleasure resorts. At the casino, with its very sophisticated cosmopolitan flair, roulette and practically every other game of chance may be played. This imposing building also contains a library and a ballroom, as well as palatial dining rooms and a theater which will seat 1,200 persons. Miramar, Cancun, and several other bathing beaches help to make Viña del Mar the Lido of South America and a happy rendezvous for globetrotters from all parts of the world. A few hours' rail journey from Valparaiso is Santiago, the capital of Chile and the fourth largest city in South America. A modern metropolis with fine hotels and restaurants, up-to-date shops, bustling office buildings, and the best of modern theaters. The Union Club is one of the most famous of its kind in South America, and its membership list reads like the who's who of an international institution. Santiago is noted for its beautiful parks and imposing monuments, one of the most famous of which may be seen at the Parque Forestal. The Alameda de las Delicias is the famous promenade of Santiago, where the younger set of the city enjoy the simple diversion of promenading in romantic settings that are reminiscent of old Spain. Chile is noted for its delicious fruits and wines, often used in preparing a popular native drink known as the Consuela cocktail, consisting of crushed peaches or crushed strawberries and champagne. Vying with the fruits are the flowers of Chile, which grow in profusion and produce an exquisite perfume. At Santa Nicolasa, we met a little caballero of 6 years, practically born in the saddle and considered to be one of the champion riders of Chile. Among the early races which were dwelling in Chile at the time the Spaniards arrived were the Araucanian Indians, living in the section south of what is now Santiago. They were an aggressive, warlike people who successfully withstood the attacks of the invaders and held the distinction of being one of the few unconquerable races on the continent. The Araucanians were never brought into subjection by the Incas and were never conquered by the Spaniards. Throughout the warfare and invasions taking place in the early history of the continent, they managed to maintain their independence. Today, about 100,000 of these Indians are living in the neighborhood of Temuco, near the Chilean Lake District, calling themselves Mapuches, meaning people of the land. They are a peaceful, dignified people, engaged chiefly in agricultural and industrial pursuits, and are protected by law from exploitation. One of the most entrancing regions in all South America is the Chilean Lake District, which extends down the central valley of Chile from Temuco to the chain of southern lakes which stretch eastward into the Argentine. Many of the lakes and streams abound in trout and salmon, providing a veritable paradise for the fishermen. And the mountains offer the thrills of the Alps to the climber, many of them providing all year-round skiing over some of the most exciting runs on the globe. The crowning scene in this beautiful region is the snow-capped volcano, known as Osorno, or the Fujiyama of Chile. Until comparatively recent times, these beautiful lakes were the guarded domain of the Araucanian Indians. But now, thanks to modern transportation by both sea and air, they are conveniently accessible to all travelers who would visit one of the world's most beautiful scenic attractions. And it is here, in the glorious light of a setting sun, that we most reluctantly conclude our impressions of Chile, the land of charm. Copenhagen, capital of Denmark and the largest city in northern Europe, is a gay and hospitable metropolis, now in the throes of modern development, but rich in the records of a kingdom dating back through 1,000 years of history. Over 1/5 of Denmark's population is concentrated in Copenhagen, the only large city in the country, and here has been developed through centuries of time the architectural records as well as the manners and customs of a people who have contributed much to the stability and progress of the white race. For the Danes of today are among the descendants of the courageous Vikings who carried the torch of civilization to the darkest corners of the ancient world. Greater Copenhagen has a population of about 900,000 inhabitants, and it is estimated that there is 1 bicycle registered for every 3 persons. Consequently, bicycles overrun the city and provide an interesting spectacle, especially for the automobile-conscious American visitors, who may be of the impression that bicycles in metropolitan cities are a thing of the past. But this is not the right hour of the day for the real bicycle parade. We must wait until the various places of business close, and then we will see a demonstration of bicycle traffic that has no parallel in any other of the world's great cities. Meanwhile, our attention is attracted to picturesque settings along the canals in the older section of Copenhagen, where the fishing industry provides an interesting feature of the city's daily life. Copenhagen means merchant's harbor. It was originally a small fishing village, and much of its ancient atmosphere is preserved in this section of the city, where the fishermen come in daily from the sea with choice cargoes of fish, which are sold in the market nearby. Incidentally, there is no abject poverty in Copenhagen, and much of this may be due to the fact that all citizens of Denmark who are deprived of the means of support receive a pension from the government after their 65th birthday to the day of their death. This may account for the expressions of peace and contentment that one finds among the poorer classes throughout the whole country. The flower market is composed of trains of auto trucks which come from all parts of the country and converge here in street-like formations, displaying a beautiful assortment of colorful flowers which may be purchased at most reasonable prices. Down by the sea, there is a famous little monument known as the Mermaid, and it is one of the chief attractions for most visitors, as well as the pride of Copenhagen. The model for this unique image in bronze was a beautiful young Danish actress. It is the work of Edward Eriksen, and it represents one of the characters in the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. Here we behold one of the most famous fountains in the world, regarded as the masterpiece of the sculptor Anders Bundgaard, and it depicts the legendary incident of Gethian plowing Zealand or Denmark out of Sweden. The Danish government encourages open-air life for its people, and Bellevue Beach is one of its many popular summer resorts. Denmark is an agricultural country, and practically all of its precious acres outside of the cities are devoted to the cultivation of farm products. In the suburbs of Copenhagen, we find attractive little plots of ground which are divided among the working people who choose to spend their spare time cultivating tiny gardens in a country atmosphere where the flag of Denmark unfurls itself in evidence of their patriotic fervor. And now we return to the city to witness the Copenhagen bicycle parade at its best, where most of the business of the day is over, and the whole population seems to suddenly appear on wheels. Numerous parking and repair stations are scattered about the city, and it is logical to assume that the repairing and cleaning of bicycles is a profitable business. It is difficult to understand how one bicycle can be distinguished from another, as they all look alike, and there are often as many as 1,000 bicycles lined up at one public parking station. Nevertheless, it seems to present no problem to the owners, who nonchalantly choose their bicycles and enter the grand merry-go-round as part of the business of the day. A majority of the workers live in the suburbs, and Copenhagen, being a city with very few hills, is naturally ideal for commuting on bicycle. We find represented in this unique parade tradesmen, policemen, postmen, babies, government officials, doctors, lawyers, and numerous others, all wheeling along in a round of traffic that is admirably well controlled. Automobiles appear to be very much out of place here, where cyclists have the right of way by an overwhelming majority. And so the day comes and goes in this city of bicycles, which unconsciously presents to the outside world a panorama of modest and simple life, shared alike by all classes, bringing the art of living to a standard that is a credit to the Danish people. And it is with this thought that we say, farewell to Copenhagen. Over 5 centuries ago, while barbarians were inhabiting the wilds of North America, there lived in Peru a cultured and intelligent people who were ruled by Incas or kings. And today, on the plantation of Chiclin, near the city of Trujillo, colorful scenes are reenacted by the native Indians, which illustrate something of the pomp and pageantry that was typical in the land of the Incas, just prior to the Spanish conquest, an empire which embraced that part of South America, comprising the republics of Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and northern Chile. The origin of the Inca civilization is unknown, but an Indian legend tells of a wise woman called Mama Huaco, who gave birth to a male child conceived by the sun. The savage tribes, believing in this miraculous conception, became sun worshippers and acknowledged the child of the sun as their Inca. The child was named Manco Capac, and he grew up to be marvelously wise and just. He married his own sister, and the line of the Incas ever afterwards was kept pure in its royal strain through the marriage of brothers with sisters, a custom which was also practiced by the ancient pharaohs of Egypt. The total duration of the Inca dynasty has been estimated at about 500 years, and Manco Capac, the first Inca, is believed to have been born in the early part of the 11th century. The 2 sons who inherited the throne of the last great Inca fell to quarreling over the division of the empire, and it was in the midst of a civil war that the Spanish adventurer, Pizarro, arrived in Peru and took quick advantage of a country divided against itself. This historic event is one of the highlights in native pageantry at Chiclin, although it requires a considerable stretch of the imagination to believe that the capture of the Inca was quite as simple as we see it here. Yet it is true that a comparatively few Spanish soldiers, aided by horses and guns that were formerly unknown to the Peruvians, succeeded in acquiring the coveted land of the Incas, which at that time was the wealthiest country to come under the vast dominion of Spain. Following the conquest of Peru, the ancient and holy city of Cusco was gradually transformed into a typical Spanish town as we see it here. Throughout the world, there are certain historic landmarks which represent vital changes in the story of mankind. And one of these is the Plaza de Armas at Cusco, which was once the hub of the great Inca Empire, as well as the setting for thrilling scenes in the drama of a powerful dynasty that flourished for 5 centuries and then passed into oblivion when touched by the armored hand of another civilization. The mark of Spain has firmly planted itself upon Cusco, but even today we behold in the narrow streets an occasional reminder of the scenes that were typical in the days of the Incas, when the Indians drove their flocks of llamas through the town and life was a daily routine of peace and simplicity. Llamas are native of Peru. Their fleeces and hides are valuable commodities, and they are chiefly employed as beasts of burden. Like camels, they can travel for days without water. They are docile by nature, and it is only when overloaded that they become unruly. As a matter of fact, a llama usually determines what its maximum load shall be, and it will stubbornly refuse to carry 1 pound overweight. Although Cusco is essentially a Spanish city, it still contains interesting evidences of its far more distant past. The Spanish church of Santo Domingo, for example, was built upon a great stone foundation, which was once part of the ancient Inca Temple of the Sun. And in several of the city streets, we behold huge stone walls, dating back to Inca times, but still in practical use. Overlooking the city is the great Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman, regarded as one of the wonders of the world. About 20,000 men are said to have been employed in building this great fortress, and over 50 years consumed in its construction. When we consider that these enormous stones were hewn from their native beds and fashioned into shape by a people who were ignorant of the use of iron or cement, and were brought from quarries 10 to 15 miles distant without the aid of beasts of burden, transported across rivers and ravines, and raised to the positions in which we see them here, and all done without the knowledge of tools or machinery familiar to modern engineering, when we consider this, we are inclined to agree that Sacsayhuaman is verily one of the wonders of the world. The native Indians who now pass within the shadow of this gigantic fortress are not unlike those who were engaged in its construction, for time has wrought very little change in the life of the Peruvian Indian since the days of the Incas. The numerous bridges which span the turbulent rivers of rural Peru have also changed but little in the style of construction since Inca times. No visit to Peru is complete without a trip to Machu Picchu, the most famous ruin in South America, which was discovered by Professor Hiram Bingham in 1914. And the route to this wondrous landmark takes us through the sacred valley of the Incas, across the swift-flowing Urubamba River, a spectacular tributary of the Amazon. After a 3-hour climb, we behold Machu Picchu, the deserted Inca city, built upon the peak of a mountain where 10 centuries or more ago, a thriving population of sun worshippers lived as close as they possibly could to the great orb of day. Here, too, we wonder how these gigantic stones were transported to such dizzy heights, and how long it must have taken to construct this fairy-like city, literally built in the clouds and approached from the valley by a series of stone staircases that are still in a remarkable state of preservation. The terraced gardens were a feature of Inca cultivation, as it was only by this method that edibles could have been grown on the sides of the mountains. Although the solution to the mystery of this deserted city is locked in the graves of its builders, its ruins are sufficient to reveal the workings of a despotism which had the lives and fortunes of its vassals at its absolute disposal, and esteemed these vassals, when employed in its service, as lightly as the brute animals for which they served as a substitute. And this was only one of the many cities in the vast Inca Empire, which has long since passed away, leaving to humanity nothing but a memory and a few lifeless ruins, a pathetic reminder of the ultimate result of vesting too much power in despotic rulers, who at best are as human and as fallible as the people they rule. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to Peru, the land of the Incas. Vienna, the capital and largest city of Austria, is one of the most historic cities in the world, and the famous landmark around which much of its history has revolved is known as Schönbrunn Palace, the former summer residence of the House of Habsburg. It was here that Maria Theresa, Napoleon Bonaparte, Francis Joseph, and other world-famous rulers once resided and entertained in regal splendor. Incidentally, the palace contains 1,441 rooms and 139 kitchens, and it is now used as a museum. Most of the older churches of Vienna commemorate some important event in the history of the city. The Charles Church, for example, was built in the year of 1713 as a thank offering for relief from a plague, and the double-spired votive church commemorates the Emperor Francis Joseph's escape from assassination in 1853. The Staatsoper, one of the world's most famous opera houses, reminds us that Austria has always been a patron of great music, and no musical career is considered complete without at least one appearance at this internationally famous opera house. But the gaiety for which the city of Vienna has always been noted does not associate itself so much with opera houses as it does with Heurigers or wine gardens, which are identified by a bough of evergreen hung over the entrance. Here, in simple environment, the guests may partake of the wines of the season, as well as other inexpensive beverages, and join in the spirit of gaiety and song.
We drink to your health with Vienna wine, with joy in our hearts we will sing and dine. From morning till night in the Strasse ring, there's joy in the city that loves to sing. So drink, let us drink to Vienna gay. Let us sing all our cares away.
The folk costume of Austria lends itself very colorfully to the countryside, as do the folk dances, which are performed today very much the same as they were generations ago. One of the most popular folk dances of Austria is called the Schuhplattler, and it consists of well-timed hand movements as well as foot movements. Among the many Viennese composers who have achieved world fame is Johann Strauss, the Waltz King, whose monument we now behold. If Johann Strauss had composed nothing else, he would still be famous for the composition of his immortal waltz, the beautiful Blue Danube.
Sailing the blue, blue Danube with you, away from the throne, on wings of a throne, now under the moon, true love will come soon.
On wings of song, we have arrived at the little village of Hallstatt, located in what is known as the region of Salzkammergut, or the land of salt mines in the Alpine district of Austria. Hallstatt is one of the oldest towns in the world, human skeletons and fossils found here having been identified with the first Iron Age of Central Europe. But Hallstatt's ancient history does not concern us so much as its picturesque mountain roads and the hospitality of the simple folk we meet along the way. The cares of a troubled world are seldom identified with this vale of peace, where the spirit of romance is ever present and tired travelers long to rest. But the lure of wanderlust overcomes us, and we continue our journey to another famous hamlet in this region, known as St. Wolfgang. The chief landmark in this little hamlet is the famous old White Horse Inn, which has inspired the world with poetry and romance for over a century. Among the notable guests who have stopped at this colorful hostelry were the Emperor Francis Joseph, King Albert of Saxony, and Ferdinand, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, about whom a rather amusing story is told, a story which has traveled around the world and given inspiration for similar tales about other famous people. It seems that these royal personages were on a hunting excursion, dressed in typical folk costumes, and being overcome with fatigue, they halted a peasant who was driving a cart along one of the mountain roads. They induced the peasant to give them a lift back to the White Horse Inn, and as they were jogging along the road, Francis Joseph introduced himself as the Emperor of Austria, and Albert said, "I am the King of Saxony," while Ferdinand admitted that he was the Grand Duke of Tuscany. The peasant took all this in good grace and then calmly introduced himself as the Emperor of China. It is also said that Johann Strauss composed his beautiful Blue Danube Waltz while occupying a room at the White Horse Inn. And this is the romantic thought that we take with us as we most reluctantly conclude our glimpses of Austria.
Now under the moon.